Kelsey. I have my hat, and on this beautiful, beautiful sunny day, I am going to be bringing you my very first full series review on this channel, and that is of the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. I have decided that anytime I finish a full series, I want to try to do a relatively spoiler-free series review. Since in a lot of the series I read, the books don't necessarily stand on their own very well. And also because I feel like a full series review is something that would be helpful for a reader like me in figuring out whether or not it's going to be worthwhile to pick up a series that I haven't started yet. Because I want to know when I pick up the first book in a series, is this something where I am going to want to read and enjoy the entire series? Or is this something that I'm going to spend a lot of time with and end up being disappointed in? That said, I'm obviously starting with a series that a lot of people on BookTube have already read or at least started. But this is a series that I have a lot of thoughts and opinions about, and I would love to open a discussion with you guys and hear back from you what you thought. The Lunar Chronicles is a series of sci-fi fairy tale retellings that take place on Earth and on the Moon in the Third Era, which is an unspecified distance in the future from today. There are 4 main books and 2 supplemental books. The main books are Cinder, which is a retelling of Cinderella, Scarlet, which is Little Red Riding Hood, Cress, which is Rapunzel, and Winter, which is Snow White. The secondary books are Fairest, which is a prequel, but in reading order it is 3.5 because of spoilers, and Stars Above, which is a collection of short stories. Several of these could be read earlier as opposed to later in the series, but if you're reading the entire collection, it is to be read after Winter because one of the stories is an epilogue. I own all 4 of the main books. I do not own these. These are library copies. And this series is very far from being anything like great literature. But I personally totally love it. And I gave Cinder 5 stars, Scarlet 4 stars, Cress 5 stars, Winter 5 stars, and Fairest and Stars Above each 4 stars. I feel like I cannot in any way ever justify giving a supplemental book to a series a 5-star rating. Someday maybe I might meet a book that will change my mind about that, but while I enjoyed these, they did not. It's also a bit of a pet peeve of mine that the cover art for Fairest does not match the others. So I think because I'm wielding 6 books here, I'm just going to let them sit here while I talk about them for the rest of the video. I actually first listened to Cinder on audiobook about 1.5 years ago, and I think that was not long before Cress came out, so I was able to read the first 3 essentially straight through. The audiobooks for this series, by the way, are narrated by Rebecca Soler, and while I only listened to the first book on audiobook, I have heard clips of her narration for the other books, and I think she does a fabulous job with this series. I then read Fairest when it came out between Cress and Winter, and then I reread Cinder, Scarlet, and Cress leading up to the release of Winter, which I read in January. I talked about it in my January wrap-up, which I'll link for you. I read Stars Above when it came out at the beginning of last month. I also talked about that in my wrap-up for February, so I will link that as well. So basically the main gimmick of this series, if you will, is the mashup of fairy tale retellings and sci-fi, and also the way in which it strings 4 different fairy tale retellings together to form one cohesive story arc. Each of these books introduces a new protagonist, but the main protagonist of the series is Cinder, who is a cyborg mechanic in New Beijing, the capital city of the Eastern Commonwealth. And of course, she has an evil stepmother and 2 stepsisters, and she meets a prince. But what I immediately found likable about this retelling from the start is that Cinder both fits the mold of the Cinderella storyline very well, while also being really nothing like how we imagine the traditional character of Cinderella. She's allowed to be stubborn, she's allowed to make mistakes, and ultimately she is a girl with much more important things on her mind than getting to a fancy ball. And the story is predictable. And not just because it's a retelling. This is a YA sci-fi fantasy story arc that if you read series like this, you have read some variation of it countless times. There is an evil lunar queen making threats against Earth, and it was very obvious from the beginning that Queen Levana is Snow White's evil stepmother. There is a central character with a mysterious past, and you will totally know where that's going. And in fact, part of what I liked this series is that it didn't feel like it was trying to hide its tropiness. I felt like the protagonist of each of these books is obviously a spin on a well-known female young adult protagonist type, and each are well matched to their fairy tale. Cinder is the underdog with a hero's destiny. Scarlet is the brave and tough young woman who will always put the people she cares about first. Cress is the seemingly timid damsel who might not need as much rescuing as she thinks. And Winter is the stifled princess in an evil court. And yes, each book introduces to the story a fairy tale that you know. But honestly, this is also a story that you know. What I most appreciate about this series that makes it just my light, fun reading happy place is the tone. I feel like a lot of the YA fantasy and sci-fi type series that I read, how to put this delicately, wallow around in this sort of irrational angst. I think I've actually put it in similar words on this channel before. And I think sometimes it comes from the perceived need to seem more profound and more important than the story being told actually is. And to me, this series was light enough in tone that it had none of that presumptuousness. In fact, I sort of liked being able to transparently see exactly how unoriginal elements of this story are. Does that make any sense? I also like the tone of the characters and their relationships. We get so much less of being in characters' heads as they wallow in their own personal turmoil, and a whole lot more of offbeat personalities bouncing off of each other in fun ways, and there's a lot of banter and a lot of laughs even when events in the series get serious. I was laughing a lot at these characters and their jokes. And this series also will not, I suppose this is maybe a bit of a spoiler, but it isn't really. It will not do any messy love triangle things to your poor heart. Each romantic pairing does stay fully and completely within their designated fairy tale. You don't get people from the wrong fairy tales like trying to hook up with someone who does not belong in their story. And I think that was one element of the lack of general angstiness for me that I enjoyed. Each girl in this series has a love interest, and while I was more into some of them than others as romantic partners for these characters, each couple eventually won me over by the end in their own way. I was a little worried when Fairest came out because this is a backstory for the villain in the series, and I so did not want at this point between the penultimate book and the final book to be asked to sympathize with the villain. And I will say that while this is darker in tone than the rest of the series, it is short enough that it did not get bogged down in it, and it does not make you sympathize with Levana. It does give you more insight into lunar history and politics and culture, which can be helpful going into winter because most of the series takes place on Earth, actually, despite the series title. Even though the main action in winter does need to take place on the moon, so this helps bridge that gap. I would also point out that while I, as a person, tend to really enjoy dark adult fairy tale retellings that pull on the grittier and less tame material from original fairy tales, these are kind of playing off what I consider to be the Disney-fied type of way we view these stories, even though I realize there isn't a Disney Little Red Riding Hood. But there are elements of Cinder that will definitely feel maybe more familiar if your Cinderella of choice is the Disney animated film. And there are definitely elements of Cress that feel like they come from Tangled as opposed to the real Rapunzel. But the one story in Stars Above that is a fairy tale retelling on its own, The Little Android, is a retelling of The Little Mermaid that does stay true to the more tragic nature of the original, and I actually thought it was really beautiful and really sad and really touching. And I think The Little Android deserves a special mention from reading Stars Above because it does add an extra fairy tale to this world. It tells the whole story in a short story. It's such an obvious matchup of the sci-fi theme of artificial intelligence and the story of The Little Mermaid that I would be totally shocked if no one has ever done it before. Has anyone ever done it before? But I really sort of wished that there were more standalone short fairy tales in this world, in this collection, because I think it's one of the strongest stories in this collection and I enjoy how well it stands on its own. So I might suggest, if you have no idea if Marissa Meyer's writing style or her particular blend of sci-fi and fairy tales is going to work for you, you could just pick up The Little Android and read it. It doesn't contain spoilers for the rest of the series, even though Cinder does show up in the story. And as I said, it stands on its own really well. Just a couple more things that I want to mention before I let you go. Winter, the final book, it was a whopper. It was very long. Everyone's talking about how long it was. It does feel like this was the sort of series that started out with the author thinking, oh, this would be cool in the first book, and then getting more and more ambitious until the story sort of like exploded almost but not quite past what the first book was set up to handle. But something I want to mention about this book is while I wished that the Snow White story had ended up being more central to the resolution of the overall plot, I understand that we're juggling 4 fairy tales at this point, but I feel like one thing this book really did well was wrap up the Cinderella plotline. I felt like the ending of this book for me was a really emotionally satisfying conclusion to the Cinderella fairy tale retelling that got sort of left hanging on a cliffhanger at the end of Cinder. I also want to say that Princess Winter has my birthday. It is revealed in Fairest that Princess Winter's birthday is January 3rd. That is my birthday. I know that isn't why Marissa Meyer did it. I know that Marissa Meyer did it because the first book in the series, Cinder, was published on a January 3rd of I'm not sure what year. But that means, guys, I not only share a birthday with the amazing Princess Winter, I share a birthday with this series as a whole. So I'm thinking that maybe the reason I love this series is like none of the reasons I was talking about before. Maybe it's just fate and astrology. Also, I uploaded my first booktube video this year on January 3rd, my birthday, because I gave myself a booktube channel for my birthday. So me, this channel, Princess Winter, and this series all have the same birthday. So there. Okay, that is all. Please talk to me in the comments. Bye for now.